Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just going to wait a few minutes while everyone enters the room. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Welcome to everyone who's joining us on the live platforms. This is the Hunger for Justice series, brought to you by A Growing Culture. This is the 11th episode of the series, celebrating Black land ownership with Queen Quet of the GullahGeechee Nation. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We will be populating the chat box with ways to support today's speakers. We'll also be taking questions from the audience during the last 15 minutes of the conversation, so please submit your questions beforehand for them to be answered by Queen Quet. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded for public viewing on the AGC YouTube channel. A Growing Culture is a nonprofit organization advancing a culture of farmer autonomy and agroecological innovation. We thank you for joining us today. And now you'll be hearing some words from founder of AGC, Lauren Cardelli.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you everybody from around the world for tuning in to the 11th episode. This has been quite an exciting journey. Queen Quet joined us, and it was the opening keynote on our Juneteenth broadcast. And we are so excited to have her back today, talking about Black land ownership. Malcolm X said, revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. 100 years ago, in the United States, almost 15% of the acreage in the US was in the hands of Black farmers. Today, less than 0.5%. Everybody here needs to let that sink in. What that means. This isn't a local problem only. This is happening all over the world through unjust policies, land grabbing, corporate interests, and a lot of times complacency and ignorance that allows this injustice to be perpetuated. One of the things that AGC does is we work with communities all over the world because solidarity in the fight against industrial agriculture is absolutely paramount. We work with the Maasai tribe in Loliondo, Tanzania, whose land is being stolen in an illegal land grab today by the royal family of Dubai, as well as an eco-resort company based in Boston, US, called Thompson Safari, right? Their tagline for their Loliondo resort is literally, our home, your adventure. The audacity, right? Because they, of course, deny paying off local police. They deny corrupting politicians to push the Maasai off their homes. They deny burning down the homes of the Maasai in an effort to push them further. And they do this all through the lens of development, through the lens of charity. How dare them, right? They paint a picture of helping the Maasai, and they choose a school conveniently located further away. And they bring tools and resources, and they bring those tourists there and say, look how we're helping the Maasai. Your vacation is not an excuse to oppress. We must wake up. Too often, resorts and even environmental branded entities are perpetuating injustice and slavery. Too often, environmental causes are just used to cover the face of the real injustice. We must ask questions. We must demand answers, and we must make sure we're not being complicit. This story is parallel to the fight of the GullahGeechee people today in the United States as they work to protect a branch of Africa's tree that took root in North America. I am so honored to have not only be presenting Queen Quet here today on the Hunger for Justice broadcast too, but have to been cultivating a friendship with Queen Quet. Queen Quet is a published author, computer scientist. I mean, I could go on forever, right? So many skills, so many talents, a legend beyond legends, right? She's a columnist, a preservationist, environmental justice advocate, right? She is the founder of the premier advocacy organization for the continuation of the GullahGeechee culture, the GullahGeechee Sea Island Coalition. She provides histo-musical presentations all over the world and was also the first GullahGeechee person to speak on behalf of her people before the United Nations. She is joined today by her dear friend, Tiffany Mouzon, who will be interviewing her. Tiffany is a native GullahGeechee and a member of the GullahGeechee Sustainability Think Tank and the GullahGeechee Sea Island Coalition. I am excited to listen and learn from these two visionaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Queen Quet. It is always a pleasure to speak with you, to learn from you, and to grow together. So I'm looking forward to today and so excited to be here.
Yeah, so glad for see Hannah Tiffany.
Hey.
After Rona show up and things like that, and we ain't forget we hugs in and things like
No,
that.
we got a social distancing thing.
And it though. So we can still deal you for hope on this your land. So I'm so glad to see you. It's a good thing. You're looking healthy. Stay like that.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's get into this. Land ownership, Black land ownership, especially in light of everything that's going on today. Having modern conversations about reparations and what that looks like, and sovereignty, and people are really shaking things up. So I would like to start for those who don't know, because I keep hearing a lot of conversations about this 40 acres and a mule, and so let's start from our beginning. Tell us about the history of a lot of our land ownership, because that is one of the distinctions in our community, has been generational land ownership. So I think it would be helpful to start at the beginning.
Well, we're glad for there one more again, as Sonny can see. You see the land right there behind me and things like that, because I did on some of this your land with Tiffany the Cracky Teapot. And so when Honey Yeti about the GullahGeechee and things like that, the GullahGeechee Nation going from Jacksonville, North Kakalaki, all the way down to Jacksonville, Florida. So on these just Sea Island and things like that, this have been the same place where many of we African ancestors, the Igbo, Mandinka, Malinke, Yoruba, GullahGeechee, Mendi, Temni, Fiki, Bibio, join in with the Yemisi, the Kusabo, and plenty more, the Edisto, Wabideya, and make your family right upon this your land. But they've been in the 15, the 16, the 17, the 1800s. They've been enslaved the African people, the children from Al-Kebulan, Mother Africa children and things like that. They punish your land for what is your place. So when we just start talking about ownership, then it going into this your time what plenty of 100 children might done yet about called reconstruction, but we would do this for that time. So a lot of people who've never heard of our language, they've never heard of our land, they've never heard of our traditions, and they don't realize that GullahGeechees were the descendants of the people enslaved on the Sea Islands from Jacksonville to Jacksonville. However, these same people became the owners of the very land that they had been enslaved on. And we still own that land, still work that land. In the case of my family, from 1862 to the present, we've consistently owned land on both St. Helena Island and Palawana Islands in Beaufort County. Then I have other family members, of course, that are in Charleston and so on, that own land and have owned it from around the same period of time. Many GullahGeechees purchased land, because when we start talking about that Special Field Order 15, which is what comes about where people derive from it, what they call the 40 acres and a mule, that Special Field Order was issued during the U.S. Civil War, not after. That's why the year 1862 is so critical. There was actually a confiscation act that U.S. President Lincoln put into place, because when South Carolina seceded from the Union, they were the first ones, and said that they were not going to stay in, they were going to do their own thing. They wanted to remain enslavers.
Right.
Well, when they did that, that started the Civil War, the war of brother against brother, as some people still call it, the war of northern aggression. All right. When that war started, what folks probably didn't expect was that as the Union troops came in, all the Anglo people, all the Bakr and Obadiah, left. And when they left lock, stock, and barrel. In many cases, though, leaving behind the African people, who are now called GullahGeechee. So when William Tecumseh Sherman is spoken about, more often than not, he's spoken about burning things, the great march to the coast and how he burnt everything. But no one really wants to talk about what he did in terms of issuing the Special Field Order 15 that said from Charleston down to Fernandina, which is Florida, and all the abandoned rice fields, and then 35 miles inland to the St. Johns River shall be issued to the Negroes. It also made it clear no whites are to dwell herein, except in the case of military occupation. Now, Lincoln had made it such that the land that all of these Anglo people had left was confiscated for the non-payment of taxes. So here we have a situation where it ties together two things that are still so crucial to our land. You have auctions because of taxes, okay? And we're still fighting, stopping auctioned off land of GullahGeechees because of taxes in this region. But we are the region, the GullahGeechee Nation is the region where Special Field Order 15 was issued, where it determined where this land would be distributed in 40-acre plots to the, quote, Negroes. This is the area where that took place. And this has remained the homeland for us. And literally, as I always say, the land is our family and the waterways are our bloodline, because truly our ancestors' blood, sweat, tears, and even the placenta of many of us living is buried in this soil. So we are the souls of this soil. So when you say to us, sell land or let it get auctioned, that's like you putting the whole family back on an auction block.
Yes, I think that is so important to know. The Black land ownership goes back to the Civil War. And so for many of our families, part of the family struggle has been, how do we hold on to this land? How do we make sure that this land is not taken away from us? Because so many families have struggled. So I think that segues into our heirs property concerns.
Oh, yeah.
So as far as Black land ownership in GullahGeechee communities, that same structure that our ancestors set up in purchasing land has been used against us legally. So now we have situations where families that are generations in, 3, 4, 5 generations. So you have several, some families large, like my family, it could be 100 heirs that are all, you know, connected to a property that an ancestor left. So legally, how do we resolve that? Legally, how do we move forward? So heirs property issues, I think that it's been used against us, but we have fought back. And I definitely know that recently we've had some really big wins in different states about getting special legislation to help protect us against heirs property. So I think if you would give us some wisdom about heirs property and the significance of it for those who don't know, who may be connected and have their own heirs property in their family.
Yeah, definitely. That's critical that you brought that up, because some people don't realize why it's called heirs property. So the point was that with those deeds that I mentioned from 1862, when you look at it, you'll see your great-great-grandparent, or it might be several more greats on it, depending on how old you are and what generation you are in your family. But you will see that it'll have the grandfather, the grandmother, then their children, then their grandchildren, and then the very last, and somebody, they raising somebody, they on there. And then if the very last part will say, and their heirs. And that was to speak for this generation now. The people they would have never seen, because they didn't live to see us in the 2000s when they were around in the 1800s. So they were trying to ensure that for their progeny, for their future generations, they would still have a place to live, a place to feed themselves from, a place to sustain themselves, and a place to sustain their cultural community. So when we look at heirs property, that's why it has that terminology. So now when you mention the hundreds of people, think about it. From 1862 to now, look at how many people in your family have been born. from those particular great-great-grandparents. So now you have all these people that are layered on different levels in terms of how close they would have been in generation to those initial purchasers of that property from that auction. When they purchased it, then the next set of people is right below them, then the next set, then the next set. So I'm a mathematician by degrees. So then what happens is percentages are drawn up of what the value of ownership is. So in essence, your mama might have a 25% interest, but your mama had 5 children. And so if something happened to your mama, all the children have equal interest. So now they have 5% each of that property. So if that property is 100 acres, they are right. But if that property is only 1 acre, we might have a problem. Correct. So now, if you talk about 100 people and 1 acre of property, you know you got a problem. Okay, so the biggest issue with heirs property, though, has been the heirs that leave. When the Great Migration happened in the 1930s, a lot of people left this land. They left this land for a number of reasons, not because the depression was the issue. The issue was hurricanes, which we still are faced with, that inundated the land with things that now wasn't allowing the crops to grow or crops drowned out. If people could not be agrarian, they had to find work elsewhere to get money to buy things to feed their families. Some went over to cities. Like if they left from Beaufort County, South Carolina, they usually went south to Savannah, Georgia, and tried to work there. If they could not get enough work, they would get on the train and head north, and many ended up in New York City and New England and places like that. And so then what ends up happening, though, is if they don't come back, because people expect them to go temporarily, some may never come back. So now you're talking about their grandchildren being heirs now who never saw down south, never spent a summer, never saw the land, but they got 100 cousins living on this particular parcel of property in a family compound. But a lawyer will come along and say, well, these destructionaires want this property because they want to put a resort here. And so now we done offered the old lady in the house, you know, couple $1,000. Now her property worth over 100,000, but you offered her $10,000 and you brought in a briefcase and cash. So when she still told you, get off my property now, go on, get off here. All right, you now go in the office, you go downtown, you go in the county office, and you find out who else are the heirs, who else is part of this property, and you start sending out letters. Well, those letters end up north, that these folks who never saw the land often get the letter, get this thing that says, well, if you sign here, I'll give you $1,000. I'll give you $500. They sign off their birthright, similar to scriptures where you gave up your birthright for a bowl of soup. Okay, so that's all that you did. Once you sign, they claim you're going to get a certain amount of money, but in the end, there's all kind of deductions that come out of that money before that check comes to you. But now this person, these destructionaires, this attorney, they become the heirs. They have now bought your interest as an heir, and they now pierce the veil of what heirs property was to protect. It was supposed to be given only down to literal family members. But instead, these people found a legal loophole in order to displace people from their land. Land that at first was not wanted. Correct. During enslavement, Anglo people did not want to live anywhere on the coast. To be in the planter aristocracy, you did not have your homes out on the island because it was quote unquote mosquito ridden. You wanted to be in townships high on the bluff. And now the very same land, after they started spraying for mosquitoes, which is very harmful to us and our food supply now and food security, you want to come back now and say, but that's waterfront land. That's prime real estate. And so now you want to get in, you become an heir, and you force a partition sale by the rest of the family because you can come in and argue, well, this is my interest in it. I bought a 5% interest in this property, so I want it sold. and I'm not going to agree with anybody to do anything else with it. You end up in court. The judges say, well, if y'all can't come to terms, I'm going to make the decision. And the judges' decisions have always been, we're going to sell everything.
And that's the default rule for most states. So the default rule has been, and that's why so much acreage has been lost through the court, heirs property. And I definitely think that it is important to understand what external forces and how external parties have contributed to loss of land. So as far as our land ownership. So now we're fighting not only subversive legal strategies, subversive development, and as Lauren pointed out, eco-development has been the new mask for basically taking our land. So we're also dealing with
greenwashing. They call it greenwashing because you're going to come in and still build just a resort and contribute to people's oppression, as Lauren said, for your vacation, for your recreation. But you're going to say, I'm doing it in a green way, so I'm trying to help. No, you're not.
Correct. And we have plenty of examples of of our pushback, Bay Point being one of them. We're dealing with climate change as well as external forces that are threatening our land ownership. The other ways I think that we need to at least cover is, before we get into climate change and development, just so people can be aware of our struggle towards land ownership, because the justice system has contributed very directly to that. As Queen Quet just went over the example of, you can have an external party buy a sliver of an interest in an heir's property, a family's heir's property, and force that family to have to sell the property, and it's auctioned off yet again.
And then where do they go? And then where do they live now?
Correct.
Because there's never enough money, they're displaced because the property is usually not sold at market price, market value. So they can't buy land where even near where they used to live.
Correct. And when you have that many people and their interests are so slim because of the number of people, what people would get for their portion usually is not enough to start over somewhere else at all. If even pay court fees. So
exactly.
Another struggle we've had to fight against is the taxation. Because of the gentrification that is happening along the coast. Again, like you said, now that it is cute, it's in style to. It's trendy, exactly, to now live in places that we've lived. Our families have lived for generations, and no one wanted to be. Was country. It's backwoods.
That's right.
It's bugs. It was always something wrong. But now that people realize how close we are to the water, you know, and how beautiful.
And how it's all good.
So then we don't care if you've been here. So what happens is taxes increase. So the taxes increase, and a lot of families have collectively come together to annually pay taxes every year. If those taxes have started tripling and doubling, to the point that families are really just struggling to just pay the annual taxes on their properties, just to maintain them. And some of them may have people living on them, may not. But in the effort to hold on to land, annual taxes is definitely a GullahGeechee internal family conversations. Most people are aware, and that's external pressure, as well as forced utilities.
Oh yes, that's a big one. Forced utilities, that's a big one that people don't tend to talk about.
I think it's important to highlight forced utilities, that as these townships and municipalities want to stretch themselves and increase their tax base, they are coming after GullahGeechee landowners and saying, hey, you don't have city water and we think you should, even though these properties are self-sustaining. For example, our family farm in Williamsburg County, we have an aquifer, we have our own water source, we don't need city water.
And you don't need a monthly bill, and with your own aquifer you don't pay a monthly bill.
Correct. But those are other financial legal ways that challenge our land ownership. So I think, and those are legal things. Those are things that are happening legally. These are cities and municipalities that are enforcing these policies. And for some people, it may benefit one group, but it can also be harmful to other
To the
groups.
next group. Right.
So that's
And
why I
that-
think it's important.
It is important. And when you talk about that it can be beneficial to one group but not to the other, let's go back to my example I use of the urban cousins versus the country cousins. Okay. So the island cousins versus the city cousins. Okay. So the city cousins, of course, would be all for city water. It makes sense to them. Right. But wherein the country cousins, the island cousins go, but don't y'all remember pumping water from the pump in the summertime? The few times y'all did come down here. Well, that's the same water we use in the house. And that water is spring water. That water is healthier water. There's nothing added to that water coming in. We have a clean aquifer, like you said, and something that's natural and something that's sustainable and has sustained the family for generations. So even in these conversations the family members are having, a lot of times people come for the family reunion and sit around and barbecue and jam music, but they're not telling people the real history of the family land. And they're not walking that family land so that people get understanding. Wisdom is the principal thing. So get wisdom, but in all thy getting, get understanding that there is a value to the very sustainability of your body by having land that's viable to grow things from and viable enough that you can have clean water, drinkable, potable water that comes up from it and that comes into your household. And economically, it's beneficial to you, which if you got an economic benefit, lessens the stress on your mind and on your life. If you don't have to pay a monthly bill, you're already going to pay a monthly bill to the light company, unless you just going to burn candles and kerosene. Okay. But why add the water bill when you don't have to do that? You see, so like you're saying, these townships, these incorporated areas, because not all of the GullahGeechee Nation is incorporated. We have unincorporated areas of counties and we have incorporated townships and municipalities. So when we have these townships and municipalities like Jacksonville, Florida, Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, Jacksonville, North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina, those are Hilton Head Island, Port Royal Township, Beaufort, the city of Beaufort. All of these are incorporated. I even have a book about the townships in the GullahGeechee Nation that people can go to gullahgeechee.biz and get that book. You'll learn all the townships we have. And that's when the municipalities start reaching in, even where the county hasn't reached already, into your pocket. So it's critical, but it's critical that the families realize, how did we live before they came along, before these incorporations came along, and how do we continue to do that? Because some of us are doing that off the grid, so to speak.
Correct. And I think that's a good segue to, as we're dealing with climate change, as we're also dealing with what is now being called sort of the third great migration, that a lot of family is coming home. A lot of people are coming back home. A lot of people are more interested in living sustainably, living off the land, reconnecting to family and their roots that lead them back to the South, back to GullahGeechee Nation and communities. So what is your advice for how this next generation, or all generations that are interested in coming home, essentially, how can you help guide them through how to make that transition, or ways in which to get back home?
Well, you always hear me say, Hunter must take care of the root for heal the tree. So we're going to give y'all some tools right now to dig for the root. The first thing is, please get some humility. Pack humility in your suitcase as you leave where you've been in an urban environment, whether you had just been living there for a couple generations or years for a job, or you were born and raised there. Because the biggest issue is when family members come back, they don't listen to the family that's been living here all along. So you have to be humble enough to listen and know that Hunter family and thing ain't cracky anything like that, because they cracky teeth a different way than Hunter they're doing. So they're not ignorant. People are not backward because they don't speak the same language you learn to speak in the city, because they hold on to their mother tongue. So you have to be humble enough to respect that and then say, okay, fam, let's sit down. Let's talk about this stuff. Then when they tell you, no, we don't want a coffee shop right down the road, No, we don't need a big old super box store and supermarket within walking distance. There's a reason for that. If you look at everybody who is uber rich, they do not have supermarkets or any kind of stores in there with them. They may have a little kind of convenience market, but they're not about to have no big box or anything that damages their environment and makes a bunch of noise and brings a bunch of light and sound noises and disrupt their energy of peace on their section of islands. So why would you do it to ours? That's a big battle. People come from urban environments, and because there's a bodega on every corner in the city you're moving out of, you want to make the islands look like that. No, if you want that, you got to stay where you at in the city. Now, if you want balance and you want sustainability in your life and in your community, then come and learn from the people already there. How have they been living? How have they sustained themselves? And how come there's so many people that's 90 and 100 years old, but you think they 50 and 60 years old? How they look that good? How they living that long? And they'll tell you, number one, always hold on to God's hand. Don't let go of God. That'll be the number one thing they tell you. Keep praying. Second thing is say, man is going to take on where money can't. So be a mannerable person. Have some manners. Come back to the land. Third, willing to help. Because living on land ain't no easy job. You got to constantly cut stuff. You got to, whether you grow food or not, you got to keep the grass cut. You got to maintain your house in a hurricane zone. That's hard work. It's hard labor. So learn from your cousins and the aunties and grandma and big mama and granddaddy and all them that's there and the uncles and stuff to learn how to live on the land. Then you can start to sustain your own health and sustain the community and the family legacy. The biggest issue is folks coming back from the city and starting disruptions with their own family that bring police into it, which could potentially get the whole family killed because they could come in there shooting at folks or folks shooting back, okay? Or you bringing people to court and then the court saying, well, since y'all fighting, we'll sell the whole thing and you all move other places and get your separate deeds, which you probably will not be able to afford now, and live elsewhere. So if you're going to come humbly back home and then learn from those who held on to the land. How do you live on the land together in peace and harmony? That is the biggest issue. Every heirs property case that I have helped to fight for, the only way we won was getting the family members to come on one accord before they even got to the courtroom. That's the way you win, is not going to the courtroom. So like we say, you do not go to an unjust law looking for justice.
Correct. Correct. I think that's excellent advice, especially for internally, as people are looking, and I'm seeing a lot more of that. We just want to take just a moment to remind people that we're to submit your questions for the question and answer portion that will be coming up shortly. So again, just to remind everyone that you can submit your questions for the question and answer session for the last 15 minutes. So now that we know how to come back home and some good steps about, for those of us interested on coming back home and how important that land ownership is for our community, I think it's important that you highlighted that land ownership also comes with responsibility. I think that was one of the greatest things that my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents taught, was that it is a huge responsibility, and it's not something that you take lightly. And so as we celebrate this year, your 20th anniversary, and we know that you actively live, on heirs property, your family land, you farm the land, you definitely are an environmentalist, you teach a lot about self-sustainability, healing, and wholeness. So I think that a lot of people are interested in that as well. So maybe as we wrap up, before we move on to the question and answer session, can you talk to us about how being GullahGeechee and living in a sustainable way go hand in hand?
Well, that's an easy one for me. I always say to people, GullahGeechees are inextricably tied to the land. And if you see our tree on our GullahGeechee Nation flag, you know that it's human bodies intertwined, but they are rooted in the land. And so definitely everything about us has to do with reconnecting to the land. That's why I always say the land is our family and the waterways are our bloodline. So making sure that what you do on the land is healthy, make sure that the runoff into the water is something healthy. The water is mainly what we're made of. So making sure that then what we ingest from the water is something healthy going in, because you know we love seafood too. I know you can put it down, Tiffany. So definitely we want to protect the land and the waterways that are surrounding these sea islands and what people call the low country. And so that is because in protecting Mother Earth protects us. In nurturing Mother Earth nurtures us. And so it is a reciprocal relationship that we've grown to have as GullahGeechees all these years on this particular continent that we brought from the motherland to this continent, and that our indigenous ancestors that were here taught us and have it in our DNA of how to live in balance with the land and with all things that are alive. So both the earth and the people and the creatures, we have to live in balance with it. And so that's so significant to me. And that is what holistic living is to me. So that's what we do. That's who we be and things like that. The land that we
be. So I also think that a lot of people are not aware that when you talk about it's in our DNA. I think a lot of people think that that we're speculating about, you know, how we got here or who we are, but we know from history and plenty of documentation, articles, whole studies have been written about our language and where that language came from, and the skill set of our ancestors, and why our ancestors were specifically taken from their homeland, and that has to do with the land. It had to do with their agricultural skills. Can you talk to us about that history and how that is in our DNA? That even if you don't current day, today want to necessarily be a farmer, being understanding that we have an ancestral connection to land, I think that's important to highlight.
Right. Well, plenty of time with 100 children, the Yeti people cracking teeth like they share that at the first way people say, well, great God, who them is? So that's usually the first thing that strikes people like, wait a minute, who are you? What? Because they hear the language and they're not used to it. But our Gullah language derived from numerous African ethnic groups, as I outlined earlier. And these individuals were not just agrarian. They were kidnapped also because of their blacksmithing skills, their healing abilities, their way to work with herbs for herbology. They were kidnapped and captured and then brought from the motherland and enslaved here because their intellect was to be exploited to build up what now is called America, first the colonies. So the GullahGeechees laid the cornerstone for what is now America. And it was, so if you say, well, I'm not about that farming. You know, I have family members like that. No, cause I ain't the field person. It's true. Everybody doesn't have a green thumb, and everybody ain't trying to dig up in the soil. And if they did, everything would die. So those folks don't have the spirit to carry the agricultural gene, but they may be the engineers. They may be the ones that can construct the battle boat, the flat bottom wooden boats that take us out into the creek, because that was something our ancestors did as well. They actually had to build the very vessels that other Africans were going to be taken from the motherland in to be enslaved. Okay, you have the skill set of making things out of metal, blacksmiths. We had a great blacksmith here, God bless the dead, Mr. Philip Simmons. I used to love to talk to him. I used to love spending time with him. And so all of these scientific abilities, like even being able to determine what time it is by reading the sun, okay? Being able to determine whether this is a time to plant or not, and living in balance with the seasons, whether you want to call it the study of astrology or astronomy, the study of the stars and the moon and how it aligns. These are things that our ancestors knew as scientific people. And more often than not, people relegate us to storytellers and cooks and cleaners, and they don't look at the scientific abilities of our people, even to create a Carolina gold rice field, create hundreds of acres of them along this coast, where Georgetown County, South Carolina was the largest rice producing county of all the colonies, and do this in an area surrounded by salt water when you need massive amounts of fresh water to grow rice and then grow enough rice to feed the world. That requires engineering ability. I studied engineering. So when I see a rice field and I see the rice dikes and I see the trunks, I see science, I see engineering. So when you say, well, oh, I'm not about the agriculture, but you may be the engineer we need. You may be that attorney that we need to fight these cases, that can help us put laws in place that would keep us here instead of displacing us, like the unified heirs property ordinance that we got passed in multiple states across, especially the South and the Deep South, to help protect heirs property owners. You might be that person who, like me, is a writer that can now write the documents that we need to make the case that we need to fight against destructionment. Y'all call it development, I call it destructionment. You might be that person that can help in the media with making sure that this story gets out there, whether you're a graphic artist or whether you are the next big owner of a television station. You may be that individual, but bring all of your excellence to bear to help sustain the next generation, to help hold on to the land that we still own, and then help reclaim the land that already got taken out of families and put it back into families. So you don't have to farm your way out, but you do need to eat. Everybody need to eat. But now we got to feed the body and the mind, and there are levels to all of that. And so all of this will make a difference. I'm a computer scientist and mathematician, but I fight for the land. And many people think I'm an attorney. They think that my degree was in law, but I left that to you, Tiffany. I gave that one to you.
Thank you. Thank you. No, and I appreciate that point. And I think that's what needs to be, to me, I would like to end on that point before we move to questions, because everyone has a different skill and a different talent. And I think that if we understand that we are a great people because of our internal diversity, because of our minds, because of our spirits. And once we decide to collectively work together to hold on to the land, to use the land to enhance our lives and our communities and our health, I think we'll all be better for it as a community and as part of a global community as well. You know, we're part of the diaspora. So I think that's really important to highlight everyone's different skills, because I'm so proud. I know anybody who knows me knows that I am GullahGeechee, and I am.
Okay. I know that's right.
And I'm going to talk about it, and that's what makes me excited. And anything that I do, I'm trying to connect it back. I'm trying to bring it back. And so it's been a pleasure learning from you and others in the community, the Circle of Elders, the GullahGeechee Fishing Association. So I definitely want to encourage everyone to remember we have a GoFundMe going. And I think there'll be a slide up later. Any of your donations or your contributions are needed and go directly towards our continued fight to hold on to the ownership, the land that we already own, to work to stop further land loss, and also to work to reclaim the land that was ours that we've lost.
Absolutely. So if you go to GoFundMe, it is the GullahGeechee Land Legacy Fund. You will see a video with me there. So if you don't see that video, you ain't at the right place. So it is on GoFundMe, the GullahGeechee Land Legacy Fund. And then for those who say, well, I don't fool up with GoFundMe, that's too much work. Well, Cash App, $ GullahGeechee Nation, $ GullahGeechee Nation. And Gullah is GULLAH, Geechee, GEECHEE. Ain't no I in Geechee if it a we. GullahGeechee Nation, Nation. So $ GullahGeechee Nation. You can also follow GullahGeecheeNation.com and find the GullahGeechee Nation on Facebook. And we have a fan page there, and you'll see us continuously posting about the fundraisers we're having. And in fact, on Saturday, July 25th at noon on A Growing Culture, we are going to actually have our Taking a Stand for GullahGeechee Land, hashtag GullahGeechee 2020 telethon. So please, I want folks to tune in on that Saturday. It's going to be fun. It's going to be entertaining, but it's going to be edutainment. Okay, we want y'all to actually get educated more about our culture and who we be down here as GullahGeechee and things like that, and why we to fight so hard for this your land and for we legacy. So definitely plan to be a part of that. And if you follow the GullahGeechee Nation Facebook fan page, it'll also be broadcasting live on there Saturday, July 25th, and that's noon Eastern Standard Time at noon on that Saturday. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to it. So we have a couple questions that we're going to go through. And so, Queen, I'm just going to ask you, just go through each question and just go ahead and just ask you. The first question is from, the first question says, please explain incorporation. How does it happen, and how do places remain unincorporated?
Okay, so the places that have been unincorporated, they've been that way from the beginning because God didn't incorporate land. Okay, so what happens is that at some point in time, a group of people decide, well, we want to control a particular segment of this land. We want to decide what can be done here, what can't be done here, and we want to have our own officials decide that. That's when you end up with mayors and town councils and then county councils, and people start delineating boundaries, and then they go through a whole legal process of getting votes to say whether or not they're allowed to create their own township, because we've also had some cases get lost in the GullahGeechee Nation where people wanted townships and people who lived there fought back against it, or the town next to them fought them and said, no, you can't create another town because we're annexing you into our town. So there becomes a whole legal process once again where people come together and just want to delineate an area and then control it. And then they'll vote for who will lead the mayor and who's the town council and all that. In the South, a lot of these towns were done this way really a long time ago, back at the early stages in the 1800s, the 1900s, and the towns progressed. Or in the case of the Sea Islands, like in Hilton Head, they wanted to make that whole island just about a gated area. And they've almost succeeded. So they duped the people into believing that having a township was going to protect them from the county. And so people thought that it was going to benefit them because they were going to be able to control where the tax money went and all that. Actually, they just ended up paying an extra tax, and in addition to the county tax. And then the people who got on the town council were not natives. They're not GullahGeechee. So they started bringing in what they wanted, which was more resorts, more destruction, more golf courses. And so it's not always a good thing to create a township. But if there's one already there, you need to sustain it and direct it in a way that's going to hold on to the legacy and be the type of place you really want to live in with a high quality of life.
Yeah. The next question is, can you talk about youth and if there is an interest in coming back to the land? You referenced the movement back to the land. Is there currently a big age gap on the land?
There is never a big age gap on GullahGeechee land because we live intergenerationally in family compounds. So it's from great grandmama all the way down to a baby to the breast may live all there together. And so we're always intergenerational. We don't tend to separate at all with family members, even if we travel elsewhere. So with the youth, it's not a back to the land, it's a stay on the land. And I always point that out to people. For GullahGeechees, it's a stay on the land movement more than a back to the land movement. Now, for those cousins who I described that live in cities and want to return home, then the return to the land, that reversal of the initial great migration is happening for a lot of reasons, including the coronavirus now, Rona to send people home. And you do have people coming back home at an earlier age, meaning during their childbearing years as opposed to their retirement years. We've seen that ever since I started the GullahGeechee Sea Island Coalition back in 1996. We've seen a progressive movement toward people coming back home younger than they used to. And that we attribute to taking pride now in their culture and realizing that part of that pride means fighting to hold on to ancestral land. No matter what you got to do, fish fries, oyster roast, or whatever, get the money and pay the taxes on the land. So we have younger people returning home now, and it is increasing. That number is increasing for a lot of reasons, because the urban environment is not that healthy to live in too. And so people want to live here while they're young, while they can really enjoy it. So a lot of them who have more knowledge about, oh, my culture is not backwards, it's not ignorant, it's really rich. And before everybody else get there and take all the land, I better get back and get me some pieces of land and raise my family there where it's amongst the whole family compound, and my children and their children will live our traditions and not have to try to figure out a way to get them back. Because in some cases, some families won't even speak the language because it was literally beaten out of them. And so their children don't know it. So we now have a lot of younger people because of us working all these years, a couple decades. I've been at this 40 years already, but well, over these decades, but then in the last 20 years, doing things online, that has increased the number of younger people that get engaged and want to come on back home and then stay on the land.
Well, we have another question that is similar to that. And that question is, I'm trying to match to the ones that I can see on the screen, sorry.
Yeah.
So I'll just read the one that's up. So this next question says, you gave the example of water use and self-sustaining properties. In what ways can communities looking to become more self-sustaining learn from the GullahGeechee knowledge of land sustainability?
Oh, there's a lot of things. One of the things I would encourage you to do is follow GullahGeechee TV on YouTube. You can go to just GullahGeechee.tv. Again, GullahGeechee, and also follow GullahGeecheeNation.com. Go into the little box on there and search for land and land ownership, search for sustainability. We do a lot of different videos and interactions and dialogues that show you some of the ways that we do things on the land and with the water to keep it alive and healthy and viable, so that it keeps us alive and healthy and viable. And so that would be a good way to illustrate it, especially now when we're social distancing and you can't necessarily come down to one of our intergenerational learning sessions face to face. That will still allow you to be able to access that information, even beyond what little bit we can talk about here. And so when we're talking about the land and the water, some of the biggest things that you can do is try to get your water tested. If you have a spring well or well on the property or hand pump on the property, have that water tested and make sure your aquifer is still clean, that there are no chemicals that have gotten in, because sometimes now with lawns, people spray them with chemicals, or the spray from the mosquitoes might be an issue. So you want to make sure that your water that you are using is safe. Catch rainwater. That's something that we do. It's not illegal here to catch rainwater, believe it or not. It's illegal in some states in the United States for people to actually catch rainwater and use it. We use that rainwater back again on plants and other things around, and things to clean your car and outdoors cleaning. Use that instead of using city water. Also, when you farm, you have to rotate. So if you have a big enough parcel of land like we have, that I'm living on my family compound, we rotate the crops and rotate the fields as well. So plant in one section in the front during one season, plant the other one during the next season, let this one lie fallow, and then put in cover crops and so on, and then let that get just plowed under. Nothing that you have to eat at that point necessarily. You can plant something you can eat as well and plow it under. So it's about keeping the pH balanced in your soil so that that land will sustain you as well. And then you can literally live off the land. And if the waters around you are healthy, you go fishing. So like with the GullahGeechee Fishing Association, that's why we encourage safe living, and GullahGeechees don't build on the waterfront. We never build up to the marsh and into the ocean and onto the waterfront, because that is not sustainable, number one. Number two, it now causes more runoff and other things to fall into the water. And remember, I'm in a hurricane zone. So what about if a hurricane knocks your house down? So keeping trees up is important. We don't do clear cutting. You only clear enough for a farm area or for your house, but you need buffers. So you keep trees up, and that also helps with your oxygen and so on. And then we can get into a whole lot of things with the pollen and the bees and what you plant and all that, sunflowers and that kind of thing. But these types of things will also help you with sustaining land and your water, because they both really go together.
Yes, so here's our next question. So what can reparations focused on land look like?
All right, I'm glad somebody asked this, because I know early on Tiffany referenced reparations, and many people know that in the United States, every year for at least over a decade, there has been a bill put forth that never gets passed, and that bill is simply to study the impact that the transatlantic slave trade had on people of African descent in America. And so to study whether or not there should be reparations. Now, this is just a study. That's not actually a bill saying give the reparations, and they won't even pass the bill for the study about whether or not they should give reparations. So reparations has multiple parts. There are different legs to this table, okay? The first one we've had over and over by towns and by, I think, the Senate at one point, is the apology. First, apology is the first thing that comes for reparations, all right? Then there is restitution, which is you pay back a certain amount of money. And then there's restoration, meaning you also have to restore the things. And that's part of where the restitution will go into, is the restoration of the various damage you caused. So let's say, for instance, where Rosewood was destroyed, where Wilmington was destroyed, where Tulsa was destroyed, where Hilton Head is, where there have been other displacement and destruction, things that took place, and bombings and murders and massacres happened to people of African descent. You pay restitution, but then you have to do restoration, which means putting back their institutions and their businesses and their buildings that were there before, or making them whole. That's a legal term. Tiffany can really elaborate more even on that. Making them whole so that they can then go forward themselves. Then we are at the point of reparation, because now you're repairing an entire situation. And part of that repairing has to also do with dealing with the psychological harm. There is post-traumatic stress syndrome, but there is also post-traumatic slave disorder that has happened as a result of a Willie Lynch syndrome that has a lot of division amongst the people who were traumatized, and their ancestors were traumatized through the transatlantic slave trade, through Jim Crow, and through this continued battle we have for our human rights, our land rights, and our water rights. As Lauren said earlier, your vacation should not be an opportunity for oppression. So the continued destruction that goes on here is something that would have to be battled against, and that has psychological harm. It has physical damage to people. That has to be repaired. So this four-legged table is really what reparations is. And until that is done, there is no discussion. But if you haven't gotten to the point of dismantling racism and being anti-racist, how are we going to get to the point of even voting on a bill to do a study about it, which I know what you need to study? I mean, it's right there. Dr. Joy Leary and others already have it documented for you. Dr. Naeem Akbar, they already have it documented for you, the harm you've done and how it has manifested itself. And there are numerous things that document the economic damage that has been done. So we have to then get to a point where the reparations is a discussion of closing the wealth gap, getting equity and equality. And that happens when we talk about having land ownership on viable land that's sustainable, and then having the finances to continue that for generations. Generational reparations is generational wealth. And so this takes on all these things when we're talking about that, but we have to have the right mindset to have that, and not just have funds come in and then still put that back into a system that worked against yourself. So that's critical, but that has to do with the psychological part. So that healing and that repair has to happen on a spiritual level, a psychological level, and then we can start dealing with the economics of it all.
Word. I think that was an excellent answer, because that is a complex question, you know, reparations and how people view it. So we have one last question. Let's see. Do people in the community cooperate on each other's land? Do they cooperate to care for children and old people?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I thought you were thinking like farming co-ops, because we do have some farming co-ops too, and people will share land and they'll farm. But when you talk about taking care of the elders and the children, oh yes, that's a whole family thing. That intergenerational living is automatic. Everybody takes care of everybody. So it don't matter if you old or you the baby, everybody take care of everybody, and everybody looks out for each other. So if I have, let's say for instance, Tiffany got a boat. I don't have a boat, but I farm. So when she go out in the boat, she go and catch the shrimp and the fish, and she go out and pick the oyster and thing like that and bring them back with Ricky and them from the Fishing Association. Then she come to my house, but I got the sweet potato, I got the corn, I got the peas, I got all that. So then all of us gonna eat together, all right? We gonna barter some stuff and with each other, and then we also all gonna eat. And what we gonna do, make sure the churn eat, and we gonna make sure the elders got their food. So what you do is the elders get their food first. Then the churn, the babies, the lead children, you serve them next. And everybody else in between them, then y'all get something for nampon and things like that. So that's how we do it. We still respect our elders. They are first. God, then the elders, all right? The land, the churn, the rest of the community. That's how we work. And so definitely that's how we live. That is who we be. We be GullahGeechee anointed people. So we're still inextricably tied to the land, but we're inextricably tied to one another.
Yeah.
Wow, that was amazing. Social media has been going crazy. Everybody is just unbelievable. We filled up with education. It's time to take action on those lessons, everyone. Please, please. We have a big event coming up. Queen Quet mentioned that. We're going to have a moment to reinforce that event and to promote it and check out our channels. That bill that was mentioned, I believe it was introduced in 1989. This isn't something new. We've been working on this, and it needs to be continued. Put pressure on it, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Take a stand, everyone. We all have a commitment to act.
Yes.
Please.
Please. And in terms of that action too, Lauren, I appreciate folks. I'm steady hearing our little bag shaking at Cash App. So please continue to make the donations, but join us Saturday, July 25th at noon right here on The Growing Culture. We're going to continue this discussion. We're going to continue to beat the drums loud like we did on Juneteenth, because we are still doing this drum call for justice, and we want to thank y'all so much. And so folks, follow us at GullahGeechee on Instagram, at GullahGeechee on Twitter as well, and you'll keep up with all of the things that we're doing. And we definitely want to see the tweets from all of you, because I can't see them right now since we're on the air, but I'm looking forward to seeing what y'all have had to say about today. And y'all can always find us at GullahGeecheeNation.com and send us emails as well of support to the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition at GullahGeechee.net. GullahGeechee.net. Please send us emails and become members of the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition, because Tiffany's a member. We are still fighting and taking a stand for the land. A Growing Culture is part of that family now, and we want to continue to grow with you and do all that we can do to sustain the land and sustain food sovereignty and food apartheid within our Black, Indigenous, and people of colors communities around the world. So you have allies with us here in the GullahGeechee Nation. We are standing strong. We the whole upon we land, but we hope that Hunter the whole upon Hunter land and Hunter water rights right on it yonder, wherever Hunter to be in the world. So thank you to all of you for, as we say, thinking them not robbery, to even tune in today to hear what we had to say. And so definitely, we appreciate you, A Growing Culture, and the entire Growing Culture family. Keep on taking a stand for land.
Thank you. Everybody, please, we're gonna follow up with emails and share these links again. So if you donated, maybe you could donate again.